Free practice saw Ferrari and Kimi Antonelli in good form on race pace. Friday offered valuable indications ahead of Sunday's Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at the Imola circuit, but the two Ferrari cars ended the first day with mixed feelings. The potential over a single lap remains below expectations, while in high-fuel simulation, the SF-25 is decidedly more competitive and on par with McLaren. Looking at long-run performance, Charles Leclerc showed a pace similar to Oscar Piastri's, confirming that in race trim the Ferrari is competitive. With a full tank, the Monegasque driver is better able to exploit load transfer, working within a more favorable window for the dampers. Telemetry highlights Charles Leclerc's aggressive approach, showing good control during traction phases on corner exit. On the main straight, he loses an average of 12 km per hour compared to Lewis Hamilton, a delta that may be due to various factors, including slipstream effects, different engine mappings, or less aggressive engine deployment. Moreover, it is noted that on the main straight, Charles Leclerc also lags an average of 12 km per hour behind his Maranello teammate. On the other side of the garage, Hamilton struggled more than his teammate under braking. Nevertheless, he managed to exploit traction better, gaining time on corner exit. The setup used during the simulation improved aerodynamic load and, as a result, the Britain's driving confidence. Oscar Piastri, on the other hand, was very effective in traction zones, performing around 0.3 better than Lando Norris. The Australian set the best time exiting Tosa, thanks to a particularly efficient car on the straights. Oscar Piastri and Lewis Hamilton were the fastest just before the braking zone at Turn 1. Very promising signs also came from Kimi Antonelli, who completed a very solid race simulation. The Bologna-born driver lapped at times similar to Norris, proving more consistent than his teammate and showing more confidence on race pace than on a single lap. Antonelli stood out particularly in exits from medium-speed corners such as Villeneuve and Tamburello. The negatives of the day came from Red Bull, with Max Verstappen never managing to get to grips with his RB20. The Dutchman complained all day about excessive oversteer, a clear sign of rear-end instability. With a higher ride height, the RB21 suffers significantly in high-fuel simulation. This compromises aerodynamic efficiency, airflow speed in the diffuser drops, downforce is reduced, and the car becomes twitchy at the rear. As shown by the data, Max Verstappen never matched the pace of his direct rivals, consistently running at a slower pace, clear evidence that something isn't working properly. Another key aspect that emerged from simulations was tire degradation management. Charles Leclerc pushed hard in the middle phase of the stint but ended up triggering significant graining that he was unable to clear. His lap times began to rise after just the third lap. Lewis adopted a more conservative approach, maintaining a steadier and less aggressive pace without suffering the same graining issue. Once again, the standouts in this area were Oscar Piastri and Kimi Antonelli. Oscar posted the best times at the start of his stint, also suffering from graining mid-stint, but unlike the Ferrari driver, he managed to recover in the final part. Antonelli, however, was the most consistent. He gradually improved his lap times until mid-stint, before encountering the natural tire wear of the compound. For the Maranello team, simulator work was essential to find the right compromise between qualifying and race setups. The issues affecting single-lap performance must not overshadow the positive signs seen on race pace, especially on a track like Imola, where overtaking is difficult. Starting as far ahead as possible will be crucial in aiming for the podium. The tire degradation seen on Imola Friday didn't appear particularly high, despite Pirelli bringing softer compounds than last season. Everything suggests that a one-stop strategy might not be so unrealistic after all, making tire management even more critical and, as a result, limiting the strategic variables available to the teams. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc showed contrasting reactions on Friday, each more comfortable in different sessions. Friday at Imola also gave us the first real opportunity to analyze the performance of the cars on the historic Italian circuit. In this second part, we focus on the telemetry analysis comparison between Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri, who set the fastest time in FP2. Ferrari's tough compromise. As expected, the Ferrari was not free from issues on the single lap. The track's characteristics, twisty with many medium-low speed corners and high aggressive curbs, although better suited to the Italian car than other circuits, still exposed the usual flaws of the SF-25. At Imola, a softer setup is required both at the front and rear. This is necessary to effectively absorb the undulations and curb jumps, improving stability to prevent floor damage or loss of grip. However, Ferrari's design philosophy imposes structural limitations. The car still struggles to generate enough aerodynamic load. On one hand, the fact that everyone is forced to run higher helps to reduce the impact of Ferrari's ride height issues. On the other hand, it doesn't provide the level of downforce that, for example, Red Bull and McLaren still manage to generate. The Italian car must be stiffened to be more precise and to prevent fluid intrusion under the floor. But as mentioned, at Imola this can only be done to a certain extent. This creates a clear technical deadlock. Either aerodynamic stability is gained or mechanical performance over curbs is sacrificed. Between the two free practice sessions, the Italian team clearly made a step forward in terms of drivability, thanks to a general revision of the suspension setup. Charles Leclerc himself, after the first 2 laps, said over the radio that he felt better in the car after the changes. The data confirms this. He was able to attack the curbs more easily compared to the morning, without unsettling the car too much. However, it's not enough to match the MCL-39. Preliminary telemetry analysis shows, firstly, that the Australian dominated every sector. Secondly, that the minimum speeds through nearly all the corners, except the last one, favor the papaya-colored car, with peaks of up to plus 12 km per hour at the famous Piratella, turn 9. It's interesting to note that, in FP1, Ferrari was slightly better than McLaren at turn 9. Being a high-speed corner, the gap seen in FP2 confirms that Ferrari softened the suspension. Before, when running stiffer, it was more competitive in high-speed corners, but suffered too much over the curbs, limiting performance. In the second session, with a softer setup, curb and bump absorption improved, but performance was lost in the only high-speed corners, along with Villeneuve. This entire reasoning highlights the usual limitations of the Italian car, which, without effective updates, will have to contend with these issues throughout the F1 season. In terms of longitudinal dynamics, data analysis shows notable differences between the two cars. The SF-25 seems to compete with the MCL-39 more on acceleration than on braking, showing excellent traction when exiting corners. Microsector data supports this. Most exit zones are marked in red, while nearly all corner entries are orange. Throttle telemetry also shows that Charles Leclerc is able to go full throttle at the same moment as Oscar Piastri, or even earlier in some areas, with less lift and more confidence. A soft rear end certainly optimizes exit phases, especially in uphill sections like Tosa, turn 7, and Ac Minerali, turn 13. In braking, however, the Ferrari's limits become apparent. Since the start of the weekend, Hamilton has been complaining over the radio about the brakes, saying it's very difficult to slow the car down. Charles Leclerc echoed this over team radio, calling the brakes horrible during the warm-up phase of the lap, and highlighting major difficulty on corner entry, particularly at corners 5, 9, and 11, as reported to his race engineer Brian Bozzi. He still suffers from a lack of rotation during braking phases, a long-standing issue on the Italian car. If the Maranello car doesn't have perfect mechanical balance, it struggles. And as mentioned, on a track like Imola, this flaw is even more exposed in comparison to McLaren. The MCL-39, on the other hand, appears very solid and balanced in every cornering phase. More work was needed on the SF-25, which could bring more competitiveness for the Italian teams Saturday.